The morning light fell softly across the east garden of Kensington Palace, gilding the iron gates and catching the last of the autumn roses still clinging to their stems. The air had that tender kind of stillness that precedes a revelation. Few expected an appearance that day. There were no flags raised, no scheduled engagements, no press advisories. Yet as the palace doors opened and Princess Catherine stepped into the garden, the sense that something momentous was about to unfold was undeniable. She looked poised and serene, a picture of quiet composure in pale ivory. There was no entourage, no ceremony, only presence. The murmurs faded, the sound of footsteps softened against the gravel, and when she spoke, her voice carried with the delicate precision of a woman who knows the power of her words. "It is with deep pride and happiness that I share this moment with the public," she said, her tone graceful but filled with warmth. "Lady Louise Windsor has officially accepted her royal title and responsibilities and has announced her engagement to Mr. Felix Robert da Silva-Clamp." The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before soft applause rippled through the crowd. Two pieces of news, one expected by few, the other by none, had just altered the rhythm of the royal household. For those who had watched Lady Louise grow up quietly in the background of royal life, this felt like the unspoken answer to a question whispered for years: would she ever step forward into the light she was born beneath? Now she had. In that instant, the monarchy gained not only a new working royal but also a symbol of something deeper, a reminder of steadiness in a world that had often mistaken spectacle for strength. Catherine's announcement wasn't only a confirmation of events. It was an anointing, a gesture of mentorship, of continuity between generations. Louise Windsor had long been the quiet granddaughter, the child who stood slightly behind the rest in family portraits, her gaze calm, her smile reserved. The daughter of Prince Edward and Duchess Sophie of Edinburgh, she had grown up surrounded by the echoes of duty, but far from its demands. Those who knew her described her as intelligent, introspective, and unshaken by the world's noise. She preferred books to banquets, stables to stages, and found comfort in the unobserved corners of royal life. Yet beneath that quiet demeanor, something steadfast was taking shape. Even as the public's attention turned elsewhere, to louder headlines, to scandals, to change, Louise remained untouched by performance. She was, in a sense, the monarchy's hidden pulse, her restraint not timidity but discipline. Catherine had seen it long before anyone else did. In private conversations over tea at Windsor, she had encouraged Louise to see her calm as a form of strength, her gentleness as something the institution desperately needed. So when the Princess of Wales spoke those words in the East Garden, emotion trembled behind the grace. "Louise has always carried the spirit of her grandmother," she said softly, "on the hope of a new generation." It was not only a statement, it was a benediction. That morning marked the quiet opening of a new chapter, not just for one young woman, but for a monarchy seeking renewal. With King Charles recovering after his spiritual retreat in Rome, and the royal household reorganizing into a leaner but more purposeful force, Louise's decision arrived like a steady breath of calm in uncertain air. But this story did not begin with palaces or pronouncements. It began years earlier, far from the marble corridors of Windsor, on a windswept coast in Scotland. At St. Andrew's University, where the air smelled of salt and old stone, Lady Louise had chosen to be anonymous. She enrolled under her full name, unstyled and guarded. For the first time in her life, she was simply Louise Windsor, a literature student with a quiet love for poetry and an even quieter wish for normalcy. University life offered her a freedom she had never known. She walked to class without security shadows, bought tea in crowded cafes, and attended lectures where no one cared about her surname. Books became her sanctuary. She loved the rhythm of verse, the way emotion could hide between the lines, restrained yet alive. And it was there, in a course on romantic poetry, that she met Felix Robert da Silva-Clamp. He was studying environmental science, a man of steady presence, curious eyes, and a voice that seemed to belong to the calmness of the earth itself. He didn't recognize her lineage, and when he eventually did, he didn't treat it as anything remarkable. That, perhaps, was the beginning of everything. Their first conversation, she would later recall, was about Byron's use of silence. "It's the pauses," she had said, "that carry the most meaning." He had smiled, thoughtful. Maybe that's true of people too. They began sitting together in lectures, sharing notes, trading small jokes that became longer talks, until the habit of seeing each other felt inevitable. Both were shy in their own way, two observers in a world of talkers, and that shared temperament drew them together. He loved the natural world, long walks, and the hum of quiet evenings. She loved literature, horses, and the stillness of early mornings. They fit together not with sparks, but with a calm certainty that made the world feel settled. In the spring of her second year, she invited him to watch a carriage driving event, one of the sports she had inherited from her grandfather, Prince Philip. Felix accepted eagerly, wanting to understand what it meant to her. Watching her guide the horses with grace and precision, he saw not royalty, but strength. A woman who found freedom not in rebellion but in control. Their relationship deepened in private. They attended small gatherings, walked along the Scottish coast, and spoke of everything ordinary. Families, books, hopes. When he met her parents for the first time, Duchess Sophie saw immediately what her daughter saw in him. He was calm, grounded, and unfazed by grandeur. Prince Edward, more reserved, observed quietly before offering a handshake that lingered a fraction longer than usual, a silent approval. Years passed quietly. Louise graduated, resumed her low-profile life, and carried on her quiet acts of service. But something in her had shifted. The years of study, of independence, of love grounded in normalcy had given her confidence, an understanding of who she was, separate from what the world saw. When the proposal came, it was everything one might expect from her, intimate, heartfelt, untouched by ceremony. They were at Loch, a hidden Scottish lake surrounded by pines and silence. The air was crisp, and the water mirrored the fading sky. Felix knelt, not with flourish but with reverence. He offered her a hand-crafted sapphire ring, a single stone set in platinum, designed with the help of a local jeweler. No diamonds, no extravagance, just meaning. He told her it represented wisdom, clarity, and loyalty, the very qualities he had seen in her from the start. She said yes before the sentence had fully left his lips. Later, they dined by the lake on a blanket of wool, sipping chamomile and peppermint tea, their laughter echoing faintly across the water. There were no photographers, no announcements, no fanfare, only the sound of two people promising each other a life of quiet strength. By the next morning, Louise returned to Windsor Castle not as a princess reborn, but as a woman transformed. In her drawing room awaited Princess Catherine, smiling as she held a small ivory-wrapped box. Inside lay the Queen Alexandra pearl and diamond brooch, a family heirloom steeped in history, last worn by Catherine herself during the 2020 Commonwealth ceremony. This brooch belonged to a woman of quiet strength, Catherine told her gently, fastening it to her lapel. It now belongs to another. Louise wept, not for the jewels, but for what they meant, for the recognition, for the trust. It was in that moment that she ceased being a figure in the background. She had been seen, chosen, and acknowledged, not as a relic of tradition, but as the bridge between the past and the future. Outside, Windsor's bells rang faintly in the distance, carrying the news across the gardens where she had once played as a child. The story that began with a shy girl in Scotland had come full circle, unfolding into a legacy that would soon reshape the heart of the House of Windsor. At first, the palace absorbed the news in a hush. There are announcements that arrive like a trumpet, and there are those that move like a tide, slow and irresistible. This was the latter. Courtiers who had once spoken of a leaner monarchy, with resignation now spoke of it with purpose. In private, they admitted what the public could already feel: the tone had shifted. The crown did not look heavier, only steadier. Louise spent those early days mostly at Windsor, meeting privately with the small circle of aides who would help shape her new role. She listened more than she spoke, asking the sort of questions that suggested both humility and resolve. What work is being neglected? Where does the need feel real rather than ceremonial? Which charities hope for visibility but would settle for continuity? Her notes were neat, her voice low, her gaze anchored. The portrait of a young woman not reaching for the spotlight, only learning how to hold it without glare. Not everyone warmed to the moment right away. Each family, especially one so accustomed to scrutiny, has its protectors and its skeptics. For a day or two, the palace hummed with cautious assessments and tidy objections. Timing, someone said. Optics, said another. The institution has learned to fear the wrong sort of love story. It wears its dents. When the first murmurs reached Queen Camilla, she listened, then weighed the dangers the way one measures a beam for its load. Another outsider invited to lean too hard on the structure. She reportedly said, not unkindly but firmly, it wasn't distaste so much as history talking through her. History that had taught her how quickly affection can be reframed as ambition by those eager to tell a different tale. She asked the questions any guardian would ask: who is he? What does he want? Can he withstand the patience that public life demands, the silence it demands even more? If she expected defensiveness, she did not find it. A quiet invitation was extended, and Felix accepted. He arrived at Clarence's house without fuss, dressed plainly, his hair a little wind, tossed as if from a brisk walk he didn't wish to give up. He spoke not like a suitor pleading a case, but like a man accustomed to listening before he answers. He spoke about his work, about the small sciences that place themselves between nature and neglect, about how he understands duty not as identity but as practice. He said the word serve without reaching for any other. He did not promise to be invisible, he promised to be useful. It is difficult, even for those who have weathered storms, to dismiss grace when it is clear and unforced. Something in the room softened. The harder questions came, and he met them without flinch. He offered no slogan, sought no stage. He simply made it plain that he did not love a royal idea. He loved Louise, the woman who corrected his quotes and drove carriages in the rain, who moved through rooms quietly and made those rooms gentler by doing so. If loyalty could be measured, his version of it felt both modest and immovable. By the time he left, the air had changed. Skepticism remained. Skepticism never really leaves palaces, but its edge had dulled. Camilla did not make a speech, she did something more difficult. She allowed herself to be persuaded by the truth that had walked in and sat across from her. The next morning, those who had braced for a deeper rift found instead a subtle alignment. No grand endorsement, no headline moment, only the absence of resistance, which in such places can be the loudest yes. News of the engagement celebration traveled only by whisper, which was exactly how Louise preferred it. The Highlands welcomed the small gathering with their particular brand of blessing. Light that changes every minute. Air that smells of peat and pine, water that holds the sky the way a good listener holds a secret. A long table had been set near the loch, linen heavy enough to withstand the wind, wildflowers in mismatched vases, plates that did not match and therefore felt deliberate. It looked like a family dreamed by a country. Guests arrived without procession. William and Catherine slipped in like cousins at a village wedding. Edward and Sophie arrived with the careful calm of parents who have decided, quietly, that their work has been well done. And then, to everyone's surprise and no one's, the king came. Walking a little slower, but smiling with the kind of warmth that makes you forget there are cameras anywhere in the world. He greeted Felix with a clasp that hovered somewhere between a blessing and a welcome home. The meal was simple: scones and smoked trout, warm cider, biscuits tied with lavender twine from Felix's grandmother's garden. Lauder rose and fell like finches, never loud enough to put the loch out of its calm. Louise wore a pale green dress that made a memory of Balmoral flicker in older eyes. Catherine adjusted the brooch on her lapel with a gesture so maternal it grounded the evening more than any toast could have. When the sun leaned down to touch the water and the hills turned the color of old brass, Felix stood and took Louise's hand. He spoke for only a minute. No platform voice, only the rhythm of a promise that expected to be kept daily and in small ways. "This isn't the start," he said. "This is the continuation of what was true when no one was looking." The kind of line that would curdle if it were not lived, the kind of line that felt, in that moment, like a simple fact. Louise answered without ceremony. "We will serve," she said by showing up. It sounded like her, unadorned, precise, mercifully free of sentiment that collapses under its own weight. Those around the table did not clap, they simply allowed the silence to seal the vow. After dusk, photographs were taken not for release but for memory. In one of them, later slipped into a family album, Louise is looking at Felix, not at the lens, and the brooch catches the last thread of light. You could almost pretend the world was a place where privacy still existed, where love could be documented without being consumed. It would have been easy, almost expected, for that quiet to be swallowed by the noise outside. But when the engagement finally moved through the nation like morning light across fields, something unusual happened. The public did not rush to find the edges of the story, to tug them loose. They accepted the texture as given: a thoughtful young woman, a steady young man, a family choosing to believe in sincerity again. The headlines, for once, read like sighs. Within the palaces, a new phrase began to circle: enough of spectacle. There was a sense, not declared but felt, that the work ahead would be measured not by crowds or screens but by the intimacy of real tasks. Calendars quietly reshaped themselves. Louise would take 3 patronages to start, not 10. She was to attend the carriage driving championships as a guest of honor, an homage to a grandfather whose presence she carries without ever copying. She would open a literacy initiative in Oxford, alone, because some first steps should be taken without a hand to hold. And she would join Catherine for a youth mental health campaign, one built less on bright ribbons and more on building rooms where young people could speak and be understood. Felix's name did not appear on schedules. That was intentional. He spent mornings with constitutional tutors at Oxford and afternoons with nonprofit advisors who taught the arithmetic of accountability, budgets, boards, boundaries. He asked to visit programs without press. He learned more from silence than from applause. Not here to smile and wave, someone said about him with an affection that surprised them. Here to be of use. The compliment sounded old-fashioned, which is to say it sounded like hope. In the press, a phrase caught on because it seemed to describe not just a photo but a mood: the Windsor Five. William, who understood the map, Catherine, who understood the weather, Anne, whose fortitude remained the foundation stone, and now Louise and Felix, two quiet anchors dropped exactly where the water had looked shallowest. No one in the family endorsed the phrase. They didn't need to. It drifted, and then it settled. Something else settled, too. A sense that the monarchy's future would not depend on an endless search for modernity, but on the recovery of something older than fashion: reliability. Not reinvention as spectacle, but renewal as practice. Louise fit that idea the way a hand fits a glove that's been worn soft by someone you loved. There were moments built for those who cherish symbolism. The first time Louise wore the brooch to a small ceremony in Windsor, older women in the crowd touched their own collars as if recalling pearls they had put away in drawers decades ago. A gentleman in his 70s lifted his hat without meaning to. It wasn't nostalgia, it was recognition. The teardrop pearl, the old cut diamonds, the way the piece sat above her heart rather than below her shoulder. Signals read not by magazines but by memory. Meanwhile, in the quieter rooms where planning happens, Catherine's influence showed in the way meetings ended not with slogans but with lists. She encouraged Louise to approach each engagement the way one approaches a patient puzzle. Learn the history, understand the numbers, meet the people who do the work when the cameras are gone. Then, decide what you can offer that will still matter a year later. It is a form of leadership that looks like friendship until you notice the spine of it. Charles, restored by time and the slow medicine of distance, watched with a grandfather's patience and a steward's pride. He made no declarations about legacy. He didn't need to. The legacy was drinking tea at a kitchen table in Windsor, annotating briefing papers in pencil, drawing lines through ideas that felt shiny but empty, circling those that felt small and solid. He observed what every good gardener knows: the most reliable bloom begins with restraint. The engagement itself did not rocket toward a televised wedding. Louise and Felix settled on a promise to keep the year ahead deliberate. Autumn of the next year, perhaps. St. George's Chapel, perhaps. A dress less like a proclamation and more like a sentence that ends with a period. If there are carriages, they will be a tribute rather than a tableau. The ceremony will be intimate, even if the definition of intimacy is complicated by the lives they lead. No one expects to be applauded for such choices. They simply hope to be believed. The country, curiously relieved by the absence of drama, responded in kind. Young women posted photographs of Louise with captions that read like quiet manifestos: duty without noise, introvert energy, love that doesn't perform. Older Britons, who had drifted away from the pageantry without leaving the affection, found themselves speaking her name with a smile that knew how much the crown had endured and yet somehow kept its shape. And far from commentators and timelines, the life that all of this noise was about continued to be built in ordinary ways. Early mornings with horses, walks that found their way to benches with views they did not photograph, evenings when Felix read aloud from books she had dog-eared years ago, plans for a small kitchen garden behind whatever house would be theirs, because he insists every home needs food that remembers the soil, and she insists every home needs herbs for tea. If a monarchy is at its best a public answer to private questions, who are we when we are hurting? What steadies us when we are tired? Then Louise offered an answer without ever pretending to be one. She reminded people that dignity can be quiet, that vocation can be chosen long after birth has pretended to choose for you, that the future rarely arrives in a shout. Much more often, it walks in from the edge of the frame and takes the seat you saved without quite admitting you had. There will be missteps. There always are. The world has a way of testing sincerity to see if it bruises easily. But bruises are not the same as breaks, and those who know her best believe she will absorb the knocks and remain herself. That is, in the end, the project to stay oneself in a place that invites you to become everyone else's idea. On a late afternoon a few weeks after the garden announcement, Louise returned to the loch where the promise had been made. The water held the sky again, and the hills hovered at that precise distance where they looked like certainty. She wore no jewels except the ring that drew its light inward rather than flinging it out. Felix walked beside her, quiet, as if conversation were a luxury that could be saved for later without any loss. They sat, as students once did, on the ground without ceremony. It had taken years to arrive in no time at all. She rested her hand on the grass, then on his sleeve, then on the invisible thread that runs from an ordinary bench in Scotland to a garden in Kensington and a room in Windsor, and whatever comes next. No one recorded it. No one needed to. Some moments belong to the life that is lived, not the life that is shown. Somewhere on the water, a ripple moved without a sound. In the center of that stillness, the future steadied itself and waited to be met. The evening settled like a blessing over the lake. The last light folded itself into the water, and the faint smell of pine and peat lingered in the air. From a distance, Windsor was a constellation of gold against the horizon, lights flickering softly, as if the whole kingdom had exhaled. Louise looked out across the darkening water and saw, not her reflection, but her grandmother's steadiness, her mother's gentleness, and something of Catherine's quiet courage living inside her. She had been the girl in the background, the one the cameras almost forgot. Now she was the one carrying the story forward, not by breaking it, but by mending it. History had often been written through grandeur weddings that dazzled, scandals that burned, but this time the crown was being rewritten by stillness, by a woman who chose love that listens, service that lasts, and a future that does not need to shout to be strong. When she turned back toward the path that led home, Felix reached for her hand. "Ready?" he asked. Louise smiled. "Always." They walked in step, the brooch catching a flicker of the last sun, the ring glinting once before twilight swallowed it whole. And in that quiet, a new chapter of the House of Windsor began, not in thunder, but in grace. Remember that sometimes the most enduring revolutions begin in whispers. What the crown found in Lady Louise. Perhaps we all keep searching for a way to belong, to serve, to love quietly, and still be seen. Share this story, not for the palace, but for the power of sincerity. Because in a world that applauds noise, choosing calm is its own kind of courage.